everybody for coming through tonight for the DBLAC Reading Series launch for 2022. We're really excited to be featuring Jonah Mixon-Webster in conversation with Jari Bradley on stereotype poems. Jonah Mixon-Webster works at the intersections of space and the body, race and region, sexuality and class. Stereotype, his debut collection of poetry, is a reckoning and a force, a revision of our most sacred mythologies, and a work of documentary reporting from Mixon-Webster's hometown of Flint, Michigan, where clean tap water remains an uncertainty in the aftermath of racist policies persist. Challenging stereotypes through scenes that scatter with satire, violence, and the extreme vagrants of everyday life, Mixon-Webster invents visual, sonic forms, conceptualizes poems as transcripts, and frequently asks questions and dives into dreamscapes and modern tragedies, deconstructing the very foundations of America, the very foundations that America is built on. Interrogating language and the ways we wield it as both sword and shield, Stereotype is a one-of-a-kind, rapturous collection of vital and beautiful poems. I'm Kirsten Scott, and I am the director and co-founder of DBLAC, Digital Black Lit and Composition. This conversation is a part of DBLAC's Spring 2022 Reading Series and is supported by the University of Pittsburgh's Dietrich School of Arts and Sciences and the University of Pittsburgh School of Education's Center for Urban Education. Just briefly, DBLAC is a learning community and an intellectual project committed to Black knowledge making and sharing. DBLAC operates from a multi-layered understanding and enactment of community that exists within the academy, across institutions, and within communities beyond institutions directly connected to DBLAC. In every space, the support of Black scholarship and writing is central. Through signature programs like this one, we offer writing help, mentorship, networking, and resource pooling. DBLAC seeks to create spaces that promote undisciplined communication that is not limited to any discipline or area of study through the use of Black feminist, womanist, and communal practices. I invite you to visit our website at www.dblac.org to share your email address, your contact information to get connected to our community. Tonight we'll be in conversation with Jari and Jonah. I'm excited for this moment. The last time that Jonah was with the DBLAC community, the whole room was in tears. And so I invite you to get ready for the ride of reflection and reckoning and sitting with the words and the sounds and the experience that we'll all encounter together. So before I leave the conversation to Jari and Jonah, I'll just share briefly some biographical information. And then in the chat, I'll share a link for you to be able to purchase Stereotype. As a courtesy to you all for attending, we'll be in contact after this chat to share a complimentary copy of Stereotype. So thank you for attending tonight. And we hope that this offering will allow you to continue to sit with this work. If you already have a copy, we invite you to re-gift it, extend it to someone else, and just pay it forward, keep it going. All right, so Jonah Mixon-Webster is a poet, educator, scholar, and conceptual sound artist from Flint, Michigan. His debut poetry collection that we'll be in conversation with tonight, Stereotype, won the PEN America Joyce Osterwell Award and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Poetry. He is an alumnus of Eastern Michigan University and Illinois State University. He is the recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Prize for Poetry and fellowships from Vermont Studio Center, Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, Images and Voices of Hope, the Conversation Literary Festival, and the PEN Writing for Justice program. His poetry and hybrid works are featured in various publications, including Obsidian, Harper's, the Yale Review, the Rumpus, Callaloo, Penn Sound, Best New Poets, and Best American Experimental Writing. Jari Bradley, they, them, is a Black, genderqueer poet and scholar from San Francisco, California. They have received fellowships and support from Callaloo, Cave Canem, Tin House, the Pittsburgh Foundation, and the Heinz Foundation. Jari is a 2021 Gyneckian scholar and has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. They're currently a PhD candidate at the University of Houston and an Imprint C. Glenn Combar Fellow. So thank you all for joining us, and I will leave it to Jari and Jonah.
All right. Want to say welcome, everybody. It's good to see y'all. Happy Black History Month. What's up, Jonah?
Black History Month. Black Future Month. Yeah.
Okay. I couldn't think of a better way to open up this month. Just talking about this amazing collection, Stereotype, that we're going to engage right now. If you don't have the book, please pick it up. But yeah, man, it's just so good to be in conversation. I feel like every really important step in my engagement with poetry, Black thought, me and Jonah have always kind of linked up somewhere in time. So this is like, just another example.
Go back almost 10 years, baby.
Definitely. 2015, man. I was like a baby poet, not knowing nothing. So it's always a blessing to be in your company, bro.
Likewise.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
So definitely want to get into the collection. But before we do that, I would love it if you could bless us with a poem.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah. Jari, I love you so much. Kirsten, thank you so much. I love you too. Thank you for all the work that you did to make this event happen. DBLAC, I go back with both Jari and with DBLAC. Me and Jari, we first linked up during the Callaloo Writers Workshop like in 2015. And then DBLAC invited me to do a talk and to kind of kick it back in 2018. And when I say I think about that time with DBLAC so much, DBLAC is an amazing organization. I will always ride and I will always stand for DBLAC. Anything DBLAC ever needs, I'm there. Don't matter, rain or shine, we're gonna get it in. So with that being said, I want to start with the first poem, kind of like somatic experimental thing, and Stereotype. This is where Stereotype began for me. Invocation of the Sacrosanct. It began in 2014, actually. So, Stereotype has been a long endeavor, to say the least. But this poem is where I began kind of thinking about what are the kind of the embodied experiences and the embodied instructions that Black people either, explicitly or tacitly receive, right? That make up a selfhood for Black folks. And so this is Invocation of the Sacrosanct, a somatic zombification ritual for the real nigga, with the resulting poem. After William Wells Brown, Tisa Bryant, Linda Carpio, Charles Chestnut, Douglas Kearney, Adrian Piper, Richard Pryor, Ishmael Reed, Kara Walker, and Burt Williams. Instructions. First, in a widely dark room, make the floor a circle of lit candles. Take a mirror big enough to fit a whole body and place it in the middle with you within. Leave enough space for movement. On repeat, play track 8, Can I Live, from Jay-Z's Reasonable Doubt album. Second, find 6 stereotypical tokens of Blackness for the body, an article for each: head, neck, wrists, ankles, feet. For mine, I chose a 5950 bang to the back. Today I got on this nice little gold do-rag though. A black Jesus, Jesus piece, yeah, a black Jesus piece, I should say it like that. A Pelly with the fur collar, a faux platinum watch with the bracelet, and a pair of Timbs. Now, accompany their tokens with 2 intoxicants, one to drink and one to inhale. For mine, I chose a 50 Remy Martin in a backwoods filled with some kill. Next. In the middle of the circle, stand full body. Take whatever you have to sip on and pour some for the fallen. Next, take it to the head. Next, fire up. Next, fill your mouth with the names of niggas you know. Finally, in the mirror, practice your affectations for Hollering at your slime, homie, op, partner, dooney dude up the block from the heart. Hey, what's good, my nigga? Mimicking a gun voice as you tell the story of the last niggas you clapped with your chest. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo. For the song on the radio, said that I'ma ride with my motherfucking nigga. Most likely I'ma die with my finger on the trigger. I've been grinding outside all day with my niggas, and I ain't going in unless I'm with my niggas, my nigga, my nigga. Say 3 times. For the police, mouth fixed to say, man, I ain't even do shit. Hands, wherever the hell they tell you to put them. A surprise. Man, I swear for God. A conflict. Hands not up like don't shoot, but out here like, what's up? 4th, leave, turn up, stunt, flex, turn up, parking lot pimp, ride down, ride out, turn up. Take note of how others interpret your actions and speech. Stop. Now, write a poem that will raise you from the dead. Song for the unconscious self, or First Freedom in 4 parts. Can't worry about what another nigga think. Now that's liberation, and baby, I want it. Outcast. Liberation. Think, blank, meaning mirror stage, makes a nigga real. Meaning here we are, what we still don't know. Think, apperception, as if Black bodies are victims of their own psychic residuum. Say nigga and try to remember anything else. Think, blood, becoming the reflection of a distant brother. You can tell y'all related by how you mimic his nostrils when pissed or sobbing. Think, resistance, to occupy a wound with a mouth and ask, now what nigga feel like having fun after all that?
Whew. So take a deep breath on that one, as I'm sure most of the folks watching gotta do as well. But yeah, man, thank you so much for opening us up that way. Speaking of openings, right? So throughout the collection, man, there was one word that just kept hitting me over the head, just kept coming to mind, and that word being conjure, which is derived from one of the words in the opening title of the poem, Invocation of the Sacrosanct. So when we're talking about invocation, we're really talking about, an invitation to conjure, right? And I just felt like, conjure just feels so present throughout a lot of these poems throughout the collection. So just wanted to start off by asking, who are some of the presences you called on for help, or support to even begin to write this collection?
And that's it's the really, I think, appropriate way to kind of enter into stereotype, and one that I had to find my way, kind of into. The invocation of the sacrosanct was definitely a conjure, right? And this is a phrase I actually got from Ishmael Reed. This kind of sacrosanct, right? Thinking of Black stereotypes, thinking of Black bodies as being too sacred to speak about or too sacred to speak on, right? And for me, the N-word was a sacrosanct kind of material, right? The N-word is a sacred material, right? Actually, I call the N-word, been working on this series, this poetics of the iterative series for the Poetry Foundation, where I call the N-word a conjure word, right? And then we conjure a spirit, right? Every time that word is said. Now, depending on who you are, what mouth you have, what intonation, who you're speaking to, right? You're going to conjure a shade every time. That's how I describe it, right? You're going to conjure a ghost, right? A ghost of history. This shade may present itself to be beneficent, right? As like, they think about the spirit or the energy that's conjured when Black people use a my nigga, yeah, or say, like, right, it's a different kind of spirit, there's kind of energy there, right? Conversely, if that word, if the N word is uttered, right, with an inappropriate mouth by an inappropriate body, Joe Rogan, right, you're gonna conjure a gloom, right? As I put it, you're gonna conjure, a ghost that's gonna make its presence known through discord, through violence, sometimes. And so for me, this book, I was trying to work with the material of this conjurer with the N word, to see how, activated, right, it is and how it can be, right, and to see how every time we come across an instance or an instantiation or of the N word, of the, especially specifically NIGGA, right, this kind of like ameliorated version of nigger, right, it actually produces a sign for us, right, and the sign that the N word NIGGA produces for us is a process of trying to transmute the most extreme, most diabolical, the most violent, the most terroristic experiences of black life into something that can be, I don't want to use the word necessarily beautiful, but something that can be engaged with differently, right, than this kind of, than the more incendiary term, right, nigger. And so for me, the N word was the conjure. It was the magic word, right, for me to kind of to use to signify this project of amelioration that Black people have had to carry out and carry forth for centuries, for millennia, pretty much at this point now, right? And it's this kind of it's this linguistic switch, this linguistic term that NIGGA presents us with, that we have the opportunity to kind of to analyze and to appraise this project and this process of transmorphifying, right, trying to change up, right, trying to find the hope and the beauty in the most evil circumstances, right, imaginable. And so throughout the collection, yeah, I do actually call on certain ancestors. So why I open up the invocation with these names who have inspired me or have informed me in the work that I'm doing in this kind of stereotype project, right? And it's to kind of get at this central question or this central inquiry, which is to kind of say, like, at any turn, if a Black person does something, performs something with the body that is recognizably Black, right, categorically improper, based on its context, right? What forms of subversion are there, right? Or can performances that seem stereotypical actually be a subterfuge, be a deceit? Can it be a bait and switch, right? Can it be a rope-a-dope? And so I do actually, I call on, the kind of the spirit, the energy, the ingenuity of, of Amir Baraka, which the book actually opens up with a quote, right, from kind of epigraph from Dutchman, where the character Clay says, tell them not to preach so much rationalism and cold logic to these niggas, leave them alone. Let them sing curses at you in code and see your filth as a simple lack of style. Don't make the mistake through some irresponsible surge of Christian charity of talking too much about the advantages of Western rationalism or the great intellectual legacy of the white man, or maybe they'll begin to listen. And that's where the quote stops. But in the play, in the performance piece itself, Clay goes on to say, and they'll murder you, and have very logical reasons for doing so. So the spirit of Clay actually is imbued throughout the entire collection, right? And Clay in the Dutchman, Clay was this kind of assimilated Black figure, right? Who was being teased and taunted and haunted by this this white specter of Lula, actually, is it Lula? Yeah, it's Lula. Luna, I kind of get the, because of this kind of lunatic kind of embodiment that Lula kind of plays. plays a role as, or as kind of a stand-in, a surrogate for. And so the spirit of or like the conjuring that's occurring in the book, sometimes actually is, it comes from the spirit of the energy of characters who did not exist, or people, right, who are only portrayed through characterization, but yet and still they are able to incite and to encourage, right, an alternative way of looking at Black bodies and Black performances.
Right on.
But yeah, it's a lot of folks, a lot of my brother is in here, my daddy, my mama, is definitely in here, so, and even, some of the voices that I heard, because I do automatic writing, I do like surrealist stuff too. So, yeah, so sometimes I can't give a name to the presences that are speaking through the text, but they are there, they are present.
Right on, thank you. And it's just, in that line of thinking, especially thinking about language, but also the N-word or nigga or the hard ER. This book also brought up so much for me around two things that I'm really preoccupied right now thinking about. And those two things are, the kind of ontological crisis of Blackness, and as well, with that being paired with the lyric, particularly right now. And so, typically, when we're engaging the lyric, oftentimes, we're not taught to think of that through a lyrical self or speaker that has undergone social death or has endured being a descendant of enslaved people, right? Oftentimes we're thinking of the lyric via this kind of liberated self. And, we are not trained to think of Black folks in particular in that vein, right? So, just thinking through the lyric and this ontological crisis that the speaker or speakers, right? Because there seems to be this presence of the I, the lyric I, in this collection as a stand-in for collective we. I'm thinking particularly around how you think through the lyric via, the lyric I or a lyric self or lyric selves, given, having to exist within an anti-Black world, thinking through that crisis of Blackness via the lyric.
Yeah, and that was, that's number one, that's a beautiful reading, contextually and thinking about historically in the, the lineage of lyrical poetry, and what it is that I think Black poets, more specifically, are kind of challenged with or faced with, right? Is to kind of reify a type of agency and autonomy, right, through the lyric. And definitely, just as you said, the speakers in the poem, when they do invoke the I, it is a very collective I, right? It is very, in that kind of, like, in that very kind of mirrored sense, right? I think about recursion in, in this sense, right? We put two mirrors up, right? And then these objects, or the objects in the mirrors kind of like repeat, right? I feel like that is the kind of embodiment that Black practitioners, Black artists, writers, thinkers, poets are trying to contend with, right? The multiple presences that are there in that surface, right, in the individual self, in the individual body, right? This can go anywhere from, ancestral, from, an ancestral lineage, right? Like we would not be, like individually, you or I would not be here without the, without these ancestors, right? Without the mother, the father, the grandfather, the grandmother, right? We wouldn't, well, with the great grandmother, right? And so they are present in us, right? In this kind of confounding sense, right? I think one that confounds modernist ideas of what it means to be an individual. Pretty much, right? And I think for Black artists and Black poets and practitioners, right, that's that kind of modernist take on individuality being number one, in service to the nation, in service to a country or a national identity, and that being the kind of the marker of the self, right? This kind of issue of national belonging has a very contentious relationship, right, with the stuff that we produce, right? Because we are living in a country that has always hated us, right? Ourselves, our individual self is not engendered, right, by a nationalistic ideology. And if it is, right, it's then our responsibility, right? The onus is then on us, literally, you know, the pun there, but the onus is on us, right, to disintegrate that, right, to detach from that nationalist kind of ideology, right? Especially in terms of, you know, thinking about, you know, being in this cluster, I don't want to say the F word, but, you know, like this terrible amalgamation of violence and terror and horror that is America. And so I think that's another way, you know, for myself, how I try to, you know, kind of think about this or get into this work, right? When the I is kind of, you know, invoked, who are the other I's that are present, right, in the invocation? And I think that is something that we really do need to investigate, right, and to also to kind of to buttress, right, to support and, you know, investigate, to support, right, that perspective, that process, that kind of entering, right, into the self, into this, you know, this kind of selfhood, right, not just a selfhood, but a selfhood, as I might call it, right, especially for Black, because it's integral to, you know, to who we are, and what it is that we have to do, we have to accomplish in this murky context, right, of this country. And so I feel like for me, what the lyric is able to do, right, as a form of praxis, in regard to this, is to be able to kind of to shift perspectives, right? You know, I had one of my students, you know, in the class, subversions and recuperations that I'm teaching right now. You know, she had kind of said this. You know, poetry is able to change and shift perspective, right? You can go to from the first person to the third, second person, third person, right? In these ways that, you know, narratologically speaking, might not necessarily be possible or might not make sense, right? In prose or in fiction, but poetry is able to shift these, you know, to dynamically shift, right, these perspectives of personhood and observation. And so that's what the lyric, I think, presents, you know, the opportunity the lyric presents, right, for us as poets, or it's kind of, you know, this ever-shifting perspectivized approach, right, to understanding individuality, to understanding collectivity, and that kind of negotiation between the two. And so, you know, when I think about, you know, the ghost of Richard Pryor made me do it, you know, that poem, you know, another conjuring, you know, example, you know, and when I was in that position to where, you know, I'm in a club, you know, mixed kind of, you know, club environment, you know, white people on this side, Black people on this side, and having a white man call you a nigger in front of everybody. And I felt like there were so many voices telling me, like, do this. No, you can't let him get away with that. No, you need to, you know, like my grandma was like, you gonna let him talk to you like that? You know, my daddy was like, oh, hell no, in my head, right? You know, and so I think that's what the lyric is able for us to do, right? Is to, you know, give perspective and utterances to this very kind of concatenated experience of being a collective I, or, you know, or collective or collected individual in a sense.
Absolutely. Man, so much you are contending with in this work. It is so groundbreaking to me, especially encountering at this time in my life. So just thank you for all the work you put in, man, all the thought.
Thank you for these questions. You know,
yeah, definitely. As we're up here talking, for those in the audience, please don't be afraid to submit some questions or queries into the Q&A section. We will revisit those questions toward the end of the talk, so please feel free. So as we move through, you know, as we're talking about the lyric, we're talking about what poetry can do, you know, the collective we, and how the lyric can be used as praxis. I'm loving that. I also heard you say somewhere before that language alone can't hold everything. You know what I'm saying? Which brings me to the title, work of stereotype, right? And the title itself works for me as a kind of double entendre, right? In one instance, the poems are working through, you know, various stereotypical depictions of Blackness, right? But also, the title, if you break it up into two separate words, you have stereo, which is, you know, kind of reminiscent of like music, you know, sound, you know, and then type, which goes to what I think of as typography, right, in poetry, how things are laid out on the page. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the intention of invoking music and musicality alongside some of the typographical considerations that the book undertakes.
Definitely. And, really great question, you know, great opportunity to kind of think a little and talk a little bit more through, you know, how I kind of arrived at this weird, you know, kind of stereotype, you know, kind of thing, right? And pretty much like you say, you know, the title is a kind of a, it's definitely an entendre, you know, kind of a play on language, and also kind of a hearkening back to various histories and various kind of instantiations of different ideologies and approaches, right, to disseminating information, to kind of imposing, right, a certain kind of image or a certain kind of attitude, right, onto a people. But to kind of like take it back, stereotype to me, it was always a interesting word itself, right? I was always kind of fascinated by the fact that stereotype or stereotyping was at once a process to kind of abuse certain kind of people, right? It also was the what I call it as the precursor to any other kind of colonial endeavor, right? In order for certain colonial initiatives to, or certain even militaristic or imperialistic kind of initiatives to take place, right? This kind of stereotyping process had to happen, right? Where over and over and over again, these ideas and attitudes and perceptions of people have got to be firmly fixed and placed, right, in the pejorative, right, in the negative sense, right? And then also thinking about the relationship between stereotyping as a method of printing, right? A printing process, right? The stereotype being, the kind of the form or the boilerplate for getting or for producing, right, multiple iterations of material, textual material, right? So I was kind of considering that and kind of exploring this kind of like dovetailed denotation and connotation of the word stereotype, and I was interested about the etymology of those words individually, right? Stereo and type itself, and pretty much just like how you said, right? It does take this approach to how sound and image come together, right, to produce the stereotype itself, right? You have the uttered word, you have the written word, and they come together to produce, right, information, right, and that is being disseminated, right, across borders. And then also looking at stereotyping of the roots of it. So I want to say must be like Greek. They have like these Greek roots, like stereos. I kind of call stereotype, I translate it to like stereotypos, right? This kind of Greek thing where stereos itself means like concrete, something solid, right? That's why like stereo as like a sonic quality, it's interesting in this sense, right? A solid sound, a concrete sound is essentially was kind of being intimated by the word stereo. And then type itself, right? Not just the having things printed on a page, but type comes from this Greek word typos, which means a strike, right? So we're thinking about, right, when something is printed right through a stereotyping machine, right? It's like this strike that happens. So I kind of translate stereotype to be a solid strike, right, in this kind of way. But in my hands, right, the solid strike was against hegemony, right? The solid strike was against racism. Solid strike was against these white conceptual artists who was playing with Black people names and Black people's bodies, right? Because this, this work is also an indictment of white conceptualists at the same time, right? And also it was a little bit of a flex. Like I wanted to show like ourselves as like Black people, we can do the concept thing much better than y'all. You know? And that's what it was. Vanessa Place, Kenneth Goldsmith, yeah, all y'all, line up, light them up, knock them out. And so, you know, so this was it was a challenge. I call it, you know, kind of a, you know, it's like when that first bomb is dropped, that starts a war, or when that, you know, when that first sword thrust, right, is sent or is acted or enacted, right? Stereotypes for me was a bomb I was dropping on white conceptualists, right? It was my solid strike, right? Even against the process of stereotyping, right? It was a solid strike against that.
Man, and I love that phrasing of it and thinking about it in that context. I mean, because, you know, you're exploding so many different possibilities of what we could even consider a poem to be, right? Typography, you know, through the typography, but also even just through like some of the poems in the collection, Black Existentialism #8, Ad Infinitum or Ad Nauseum, and Self-Portrait and Stereotype #1, Negro Head with Nappy Hair. Like just the, you know, that poetry can take on all different type of shape in the hands of the maker, such as yourself or such as anyone of that same kind of tradition. And so we are so blessed to even just be able to have folks like yourself thinking through these things and striking back, right, at hegemony, at oppression, at the very entities that said we were not even capable of mere thought, let alone concept, right? So yeah, just incredibly indebted to how much went into this work. As we're rolling through you know, the prepared questions, please again feel free to hit up the Q&A as we continue. And you know, I think this is going to kind of be the last like question closing out, and just rolling through onto thinking again around like just how much can language hold, and questioning that, how the collection does a great work of wrestling with that. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the utilization of the body, right, within these poems, but also kind of in the ritualization of the poems as well. Like when you are reading these poems, like I was there when you first came to visit the University of Pittsburgh for DBLAC, you know, and I was there as an MFA student, and just like you know, Zoom can only capture so much. This space cannot capture like your actual embodied reading of these poems either, which I think also had a role in bringing the room to tears. So like, could you talk a little bit about that process, the ritualization, the body, those sorts of things?
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about this question again, because I'm always kind of curious, right? You know, I am wholly against abstractions of Black embodiment, right? Even the phrase like a Black body fails us, right? And as far as we, you know, can conceive of what Black people who exist, right? You know, we occupy this space of a Black body, right? The body is a place, in you know, in a lot of ways, right? And I wanted to kind of, you know, explore the kind of the placiality of my body, right? The spatial dimensions of my body, right? Its width, its breadth, it's, you know, and its breadth, right? Is breadth, BREADTH, and also the breadth, right? Of it at the same time. The one concern, or the one kind of approach that I was very, I can kind of say, kind of creatively flummoxed or perplexed by, right, was this notion of a shibboleth. Now, I think when I was you know, kind of studying, I was doing some studies in ancient literature with Rebecca Saunders and Dr. Kim at Illinois State University, and this notion of a shibboleth came up, and it made me like, what is this now? A shibboleth, in some, you know, kind of denotation connotations, it has like two operating modes for me, or just in general, right? So a shibboleth being this kind of cultural tradition, right? These kind of these enactments that are kind of carried out time and time again, right, over and over and over, right? So this kind of repetition of of embodied acts, right, was kind of an interesting thing to me, right? How do we understand, right, the rituals of the body, right, the things that our bodies do and they kind of have to do over and over again by nature of being, you know, in the context of a body, right, being an alive being, right? We know one of our rituals of a body is we have to consume, we have to eat, right, we have to regenerate energy, we have to sleep, we have to do this. But also the Shibboleth became a really interesting thing for me in the context of, and I'm not going to remember the story correctly, but essentially a shibboleth could be a thing that would mean life or death for a body, right? If we're thinking about the kind of the cultural traditions, right, and think about what does it mean to be an outsider within a culture, right? Then we know that there are certain things that you can do, that you can perform, that will have to be put to death. And in this one kind of anecdote or the story that we were exploring in this class on ancient literature with Dr. Saunders and Dr. Kim, it was like this issue of like, this is how people would be kind of like sussed out, right? A shibboleth was also a thing that would out a person as being an outsider, right? So like if a person did not pronounce a certain word, pronounce a word a certain way. I'm forgetting the context, please forgive me for forgetting the specific context, but I'm sure we can look it up and research it. So it was like these checkpoints would be set up, you know, in various nation states, right? And you had to go through this checkpoint, you had to say a word. And because of if you were from an outside culture or from outside language, your mouth might not be able to articulate a word in a certain way. And if you could not articulate this word, or if you couldn't perform, right, a kind of a cultural tradition accurately enough, you will be put to death. I took this kind of story, this anecdote, right, this context, and I'm like, wow, that's like what happens with Black people, right? We're thinking about, you know, with Mike Brown, one of the major arguments when Mike Brown was murdered was his hands up like this or was his hands out like this? So are these very minute performances, these very small performances of the body, right? That means life or death for Black people, right? And so for the shibboleth, for me, you know, as approaching this, you know, what are, you know, embodiment or bodily presence, right, for Black people, right? Or what are those little things, right, that, you know, that Black bodies, you know, can do or they perform culturally that might go against, right, the shibboleth of America. You know, thinking about even this, you know, in context of slavery, right? Not working hard enough, you know, was a kind of a shibboleth, right? You be put to death, right? Being sick or being, you know, unable to perform certain things, right? It's kind of a shibboleth then in that sense for Black people. And then now in our contemporary setting, right? Laughing too loud is a shibboleth. It can be a shibboleth for us, right? Things, or playing your music too loud, right? These very, very small, minute things, right, that a body can do that literally can mean literally mean life or death. And so throughout Stereotype, I kind of, you know, consider kind of a play off of or a play into or a play with, right, the various shibboleths that would mean life or death for a Black body. Right, in a very concrete sense, not in an abstracted kind of Black body sense, right? Real Black people, real Black names, right? And so in like the poem, and I might do this really fast just because I feel like, you know, I think, you know, this kind of, you know, do something. So in the poem, and I'm not all nigger. And I'm gonna read through the poem, but when we get to the section where, you know, these names of Black people who have been, you know, murdered by the state or murdered at the hands of white folks who feel like they performed something wrong, right? I think this kind of invokes that spirit, right? That precarity, right? that Black bodies are faced with or people who are living within a Black embodiment experience on a daily basis, right? And also before I read this poem, I kind of also want to say, also an experience at the EGI Institute in the Peace and Justice Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, also helped to kind of concretize this experience, right? Because if you go there, you're going to see these boxes with names on them and with counties marked on them where Black people have been lynched, right? Over the country in America. And then when you read the placards that let you know what performance was enacted that led to the lynching of these people, you're going to see it was what? Emmett Till whistling at a white girl, right? Or you're going to see it was, oh, this Black person looked at my white woman, right? Or you're going to see this Black person was walking too close behind us, right? These very arbitrary performances, right, that led to death. And so this poem, And I'm Not All Nigger, for the ancestors, after Francine Harris's Sift. And I'm not all nigger. I'm not all slung neck, not all rope. I'm not all broke back. I'm not all pop pop, not all headshot nor jailbird, not all whistle at the white girl. I'm not all meat slump, not all Kenneth teeth gliding across the Tallahatchie night water, not all gun stipple and spilt blood, not the boom of red smoke breaking the body open with a new exit, wet already, and I'm not all body. Not all dead fruit, dark swinging in the tree breeze, and though that is my blood, I'm still not the blood on the leaves. Still not all cotton, mouth, hollow choke, hood whip, not all t-shirt slogan and hashtag, not all don't shoot, I'm not all I can't breathe, not some everlasting shadow of dead flesh, because even when I die, I'm still not all death, not all brown sugar, stark, honey pot, sour diesel, the blues, and blue dream. No, I'm not all nigga, boy. I'm not all here in this same, not all is said, not the same haunt. I come not as one nor with nothing. Still, I'm still, and I still got my name. I'm still Jenny, I'm still Lawrence, I'm still Laura, I'm still Emmett, I'm still Mike, I'm still Marie, I'm still Jeremy, I'm still Tamir, I'm still Charlie, I'm still Brianna, I'm still Freddie, I'm still Ayana, I'm still Eric, I'm still Rakia, I'm still Walter, I'm still LaVar, I'm still Sean, I'm still Corinne, I'm still Oscar, I'm still Trayvon, I'm still Amadou, I'm still Sandra, I'm still Philando, I'm still George, I'm still Elijah, I'm still Jordan, I'm still Tommy, and I'm still George. And my mama's still my mama, and my daddy's still my daddy. And these are all still my friends and my family, and they still my brothers and my sisters. And I still had my house and my room, my garden and my job. And I still had my school, and I still graduated. Remember, I still had a life before they took that. So when you tell the story, get it right and take that shit back.
Come on. Yes.
So, sorry if I had that, but and thinking about the, invoking these names, invoking these narratives and these stories, right? We see the arbitrariness, right, of their deaths in some, right?
Absolutely. My God, I wish we had so much more time, but I have to transition into the Q&A real quick. And I think, someone will catch maybe a part of, something that I wish I could have mentioned that I just couldn't. I mean, the book is just so expansive and it covers so much, and we are so indebted to that. So switching over to the Q&A, we have a question that comes in from Gabriel Ramirez, and it reads, in the vein of conjuring, you use voice in a way that always excites me. When you are thinking of different perspectives / witness, what are you thinking about when you bring these voices to life, not only in text, but also in performance?
And that's a great question. And so, like, to kind of give a little bit of the performative philosophy or performative approach, or how I come to enact, or my attempts to actually embody, right, the voices or the presences of those conjured forth through the work. I feel like there's this issue of, number one, kind of fidelity, right? So it's like how much, or to what extent even, can I be faithful to these representations, right? Stuart Hall might tell us that representation, like, number one, Stuart Hall might say, representation is always kind of, kind of like circumspect in its way, or always up for suspicion, always up for critique, right? As it distorts reality. But at the same time, Stuart Hall would say that things are not real until they are represented. And so I kind of, use that approach, right? And again, going back to like this issue of responsibility, or this issue of onus, right? And knowing that, my body would not be my body if it weren't for the bodies of Black people that came before me. I feel like it is my duty to then represent them, right? Or represent those who have been elided through history, right? Or have been elided through language, and so what I try to do, depending on like the tonation or like the tone, I'm always curious of how, right, Black folks have this, this just, I mean, when it comes to like, I'm just say the word like this, like when it comes to shit talking or like talk, you know what I'm saying? Like, oh, Black folks gonna turn it on you every time. Every time. It's gonna flip a linguistic phrase, it's gonna flip kind of a perspective on you, right? Maybe like, oh, dang, or, or something like that, right? And so I always I wanted to be kind of true to that, right? So I'm always looking for, right, in these voices, where the spaces or the opportunities, right, for this voice to kind of to turn rhetorically on its audience. And so in like the poem Twitter Fingers, which is a direct kind of a direct kind of parody of Vanessa Place, the white conceptualist who was tweeting out this a parody herself, right, of Black language. I wanted to see, like, how can this voice and this embodiment turn it back on her? So that's how I get to the point where, oh, so I was guessing you can still be anything you want, her missile. Go on to try on the skin of some others. Like it, don't you? But you couldn't have come up with some other better context, a consent, what is it y'all calls it? Concept, right, concept. And you said you was trying to show her you wanted us to see what? How that other white woman still own all them grinning skin and Black folk? And you wanted her ass state to sue you, right? That was the whole point, right? So then why isn't you stop? Those eyes, I guess, in the bird in the hand is still worth more than 10 in the woods. Ain't that right there, Missing? But come on now, Missing, just between me and you. You did it, cousin, you could, didn't you? One of them red herrings there, ain't you? Like, yeah, you and Mr. Margaret Mitchell. Because me and you both know good and well, and well, maybe you do, or maybe you don't. Or maybe you always do and just ain't care that your little tweets was done in what's called fair use. So that means they couldn't even sue you if and they wanted to. But you ain't mean to a fan named color folk, right? By pasting a picture of somebody dead mammy and trying to fake that voice again, huh? Well, I guess you probably think color folks ain't had nothing feelings to offend, huh? I was guessing the only thing you was out to make was a bad idea, huh? But you got other folks and you got yourself calling you a conceptual artist. But you ain't a conceptual artist. You ain't that artist. You ain't shit. And so it was thinking like, how to subvert, right, this issue of recuperation, right? So like this kind of sociological issue of recuperation, right, where the mainstream is always trying to co-opt, right, any attempts at freedom that Black people might want to enact, any attempts of subversion that Black people want to enact, right, linguistically or performatively, right? And so I'm like, how can I keep that spirit intact, right, in the voicings, right, through this poem? Right, even when I, kind of sample Richard Pryor in the invocation, right, where it says, well, now what nigga felt like having fun after all that, right? And that was a turn, right, where Richard Pryor does this set, and that nigga's crazy, where he says, you get put over by the police, and you get harassed and stuff like that. Now who felt like having fun? You got dressed up to go out having a good Friday night with your lady, and you got stopped and you got molested by a cop. Who wouldn't have fun after all that? He turns into a really dark place and says, no, you go home and you beat your wife and kids. And but that also gave this presence, right? And it helps us to understand that it's not Black folks that we have to pathologize or has a, this kind of inherent pathology, right? In terms of presence or embodiment or existence, right? It's actually the conditions that we need to pathologize, right? It's the white folks we have to pathologize. That's where the pathology is at, all right? And so I think, again, right, so these voices I'm trying to listen to, right? How is it that these presences, whether they be kind of echoed directly or cited directly in the text, or if they are alluded to, or right, or if they have these presences that necessarily aren't attributable to a name, right, or not identifiable, right, as we might want to hope, right? How can that spirit of of turning, of transgressing, of subverting, right, disobeying, right? How can that spirit be intact, right, in the way in which these voices are then arranged, juxtaposed, and then performed?
that, very much that. I wish we, again, I wish we had so much more time because there's so much more to cover,
Thank you
especially
so much. Like, I'm trying not to cry because, you really just pushing the conversation there and articulating things that, the work can't necessarily say for itself always, so.
Definitely. It's just an honor to even be able to talk about Stereotype by Jonah. If you don't have it, again, please pick it up. There's a link available as well where you can go and find it directly. There's a last Q&A question that I want to address because it piggybacks off of something that I'm just curious about as we close out. But Gabriel Ramirez asks, where's the one-man show at though? Which I also am trying to figure out where the one-man show is at, but also just what are some of the newer projects that you're working on or anything you want to put on our radar?
Oh, great. Thank you so much. That's a great question, and Stereotype just so gracefully, and I'm just so grateful to have had that work, right, and to have those experiences and those expressions come through me, right, in contribution and in service to, right, this never-ending project, right, by Black folks to ameliorate, right, the worst conditions imaginable. I am trying to think of a way to, necessarily do it justice, right, to keep doing it justice, right, and to keep stitching time back together, right. One of my projects in my works right now, Ontologies, which is a kind of a research / lyrical / memoir type of work, where I kind of excavate the legacy of slavery through my own family lineage. And so there's an essay right now that kind of is the prolegomena, or the introduction to the project, Black Ontologies, on the Yale Review right now, where I incorporate the documents such as the last will and testament of Micah Mixon, who was the original slave owner of the Mixon plantation in South Carolina and in Alabama. Juxtapose that with Eliza Evans, formerly Eliza Mixon, who was formerly enslaved on the Mixon plantation in Alabama. And so kind of staging these materials, right, I'm trying to also give voice. And so one of the things this project asked me to do is, when it comes to the names and the embodiments of the ancestors that's named in the will of Micah Mixon, right? There's this one part that just sticks with me, just haunts me so much. And it's where Micah Mixon says to my daughter, I think my daughter Rachel, I bequeathed to her one Negro child named Cuffy. And the language is something like to do or to dispose without her will, right? And that's one thing kind of haunts me. So I have this other project, kind of a performative project where called the Cuffy's Revenge, where Cuffy kind of gets where Cuffy gets agency and embodiment and autonomy, right, despite being disposed of however you may want to, right, in the will of Mixon, as he is bequeathed as property to Micah's daughter. And in this project, I'm wholly curious of this kind of Derridian notion of there being a schism in time, right? So Jacques Derrida says in the Spectres of Marx that due to great violences, right, time is disjointed, right? And so I'm like, well, what greater violence in the history of the world than slavery, not to kind of be this, comparative, competitional, or a competitive sense rather, but also kind of just to think about, right, how do we reconcile the great violences of slavery in our contemporary moment, right? And Derrida says in here that, it's music and poetry and art that helps us stitch time back together where it was disjointed by these great violences, right? And I believe Derrida says this because kind of like how we said earlier, right, this issue of the way in which the lyric is able to, kind of show up a perspectivized range or perspective range, right, of experiences and embodiments. The same way narrative is able to kind of, and storytelling is able to kind of, make present those who are lost, right, through the annals of history, and at the same time to highlight, right, or to shed light on those shadowy places in history, right, where we have no knowledge or we have no record, right, of what occurred and what occurred to who, or to whom rather. So that's where kind of working the project is taking me kind of now, and then some poetry manuscripts I'm trying to work on, and kind of one, The Promise of Threat, where I'm trying to kind of like do this deep dive into the subconscious or the Black psyche, right, or the Black subconscious, right, where dreams, deja vu, premonitions, and omens take shape.
It is such amazing work you are doing out here in the world, John. I want to thank you so much for your time, for this work, as a toolkit to resist, but also as a deep dive into what we can do with the lyrics. So thank you. Shout out to DBLAC. Shout out to everybody watching.
Here's Stan, you did it again.